Hello and welcome back to another episode of Judes with the News.
I
Yet
know
again,
it.
another episode.
It's amazing, great feeling. We have an amazing episode planned today. Very excited to introduce such an amazing guest. Won't give too much away, but yeah. Before we get into that, Jack.
So while talking about what we're gonna talk about for this podcast, we came up with some topics that are definitely gonna instigate some arguments. And me and Eli have recently talked about how arguing is stupid.
I feel like we can all agree because if you're a regular watcher, shout out to the three of you first of all. And I think you could notice a trend where lots of times we propose an idea, and then we share other ideas, and then sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes that turns into an argument, and it's never bad, it's never vengeful, but it is a trend in the show. And I think it's one that we're trying to slowly evolve away from. I know it's a little ironic that a show called Jews with the News is not very news oriented. That being said, it's also kind of fun, so we're gonna keep doing it a little bit, right?
It's kind of like where we don't want to argue because we know, it tends to be in arguments that occur over a short period of time. Nobody really changes their point of view, which I mean is fine if you're willing to open up and see it from the other side. But because of that, it's less fun to do. But screw it because we need
Right.
something to do right now. So
All yeah, we're bored and it's really fun. So until we come up with better ideas, we're gonna stick to what we like to do, right?
yep. And on that note, we'd like to introduce our amazing guest this episode. Liam, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Liam. I played frisbee with Jack for a couple years. Eli, I had a run-in with at school. He didn't open a door for me, and it was locked. So sort of got off on the wrong foot there, but here we are now.
Exactly. Wow, what a story. Yes. Okay. Jack, would you like to ask the question?
Okay, so I know Liam that you work at Bread Coat, right?
No, wait, Jack,
Correct.
first, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, right, of course. How could I forget? Is a
Yeah.
hot dog a sandwich?
I think so.
Okay, there we go. Okay, now on to the other point. You work at Bread Coat, correct?
This is true.
So you probably have a strong feeling of whether people who work at Bread Coat should be tipped.
I do.
Do you want to explain why you think that and how your bias is definitely a part of that?
So, I mean, working at Breadco, it really opens your eyes to, how much goes on behind the scenes at restaurants in general. Breadco is kind of an anomaly because it fits in with the fast food names, but at the same time, it's very different in the way they go about all of their business processes. A lot of fast food places, you'll get just your food in cardboard or paper bags, and that'll be your trash. That'll be how you eat. They don't really, sometimes they'll give you a tray, but that's about it. And Breadco, they want to cater to your dining experience because they realize that people, go to study for several hours or they just go to hang out, meet up with friends. So they want to give the restaurant feel, but they also want to have a casual atmosphere. So it's not too uptight, it's not too laid back. It's a place where if you walked in and you saw a business meeting happening 2 tables over, you'd feel weird if you were just wearing just some shorts and a hoodie. But at the same time, no one else is going to feel weird if you walk in wearing shorts and a hoodie because it's just a restaurant where, people pick up food, people eat there sometimes. But a majority of the thing is, I personally feel like what differentiates Breadco from a lot of fast food chains is how they serve their food to you. So if you're dining in the restaurant, you get, ceramic plate, metal utensils, napkins. right now with COVID, they have to fill your drinks up for you and they can do it in front of you. They'll gladly get anything you want. Um, and a lot of extra responsibilities, especially right now, fall on the employees because normally customers would be getting their own beverages. So it's a lot of running back and forth that, you know, causes a lot of extra stress for the employees because they have other people that they want to be serving, but you can only serve one person at a time when you're trying to give the best experience possible. And so I feel like given the extra mile that the entire, staff is going for the customers, even just a $1 tip is always appreciated. But that's just me.
Yeah, a completely unbiased opinion from a Breadco employee.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that little pitch. Jack, what do you have to say?
I do for first off, anybody who's not watching, who lives or who's watching and doesn't live in St. Louis, Breadco is also known as Panera everywhere else.
This
So
is probably
just
an
to make
important
sure
distinction to make.
yes. But I think that yes, Panera or Breadco is a more finer dining than say a normal fast food such as like McDonald's or Burger King or something like that. And I agree with that they give us stuff, but of course I'm willing to tip, but I personally don't agree with the whole tipping system in general. I don't think that people should have to tip, and I don't think waiters or staff should have to rely on tips. Tipping started when prohibition occurred. The 18th Amendment was put in place because restaurant owners didn't make enough money without the alcohol sales, so they stopped paying their waiters as much. So they needed to get tipped for better service, and then to do that, and then it's just stayed in place even though prohibition's no longer a thing. So I think it's an outdated system that I don't agree with, but it's also in America, it's a system that you have to do, otherwise you're known as a jerk or just a bad person. So of course I do tip and I am willing to tip, but I disagree with the process.
Yeah, I think that the reason why tipping waiters and waitresses is so standard is because they get paid like $2 or $3 an hour, right? And so they literally rely on tipping as as an income. And so I think that tipping at like at a Breadco or a Panera shouldn't necessarily be a standard just because the people who work there aren't necessarily paid less than minimum wage. But I do think that any exceptionally good experiences I have definitely deserve a tip. Like I do give tips to Breadco when I have an especially good experience with that, like at that encounter, or like I'll always like put like leftover change, like I'll put that in like the donation bin just because like I'm lazy and I don't like carrying change around, and also because like I like to help. But yeah, I think that like there are lots of jobs where the amount of work that is done is not necessarily correlated to how much one gets paid, right? Like I mean, Jack was a lifeguard, so he got paid way more than he worked. But like I worked at a movie theater, and I had to like be there until like 2 a.m. cleaning theaters, and I didn't get tipped, and so more money would definitely have been appreciated. So I feel like a tip should be given when like extraordinary service is done, but I don't know if it should be standardized.
Right. And I think the problem with Panera, like the whole thing about should they be tipped, should they not be tipped, it's because like you order from behind the register, and it's kind of like you go to like any like store and you buy like a sweatshirt or a pair of jeans or something. You don't end up tipping the register normally because that's just not a common practice
Right.
here. So it's kind of a similar situation with Panera. It's just not, a thing that, is common behind the register.
And I
But
will say, I think it's really genius of Breadco or Panera to do that thing where if you pay, it shows on the little screen like, would you like to pay a tip for like 50 cents, one to however much? Because then it forces you to think like, how good was this service? And the cashier is like staring at you while you have to make that. And
very
so like
You'd be surprised with the amount of people that still say no.
Really? Oh wow, yeah, that is surprising. But I think that's a genius move right there by Bredco's part.
Anyway, moving on, something that's going to be starting in the fall, apparently, is college sports. Liam plays. You still play Ultimate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just making sure. Liam plays Ultimate, and me and Eli, me is going into college.
Me
We'll
is
see
going
what
into college.
we'll see what happens then. But they've recently come out with football schedules and stuff like that, and they're planning on doing sports. But is it safe? Do you guys think that it's actually going to be safe and going to be able to be done without people getting sick?
I personally don't think it'll be safe. I don't think it should happen either. Actually, as a matter of fact, the Mid-American Conference today announced that they're not going to be having 4 sports this fall.
Wow.
So, a bunch of smaller D1 schools throughout the Midwest just aren't going to be playing sports this fall. So, I think that's the first domino that's going to fall. That's eventually going to set off a big chain of events that could lead to no sports being played this year. And the reason I don't think sports should be played is because college athletes, although the door has now been opened for them to get paid, they still really don't get paid outside of, their tuition being paid for. It's not like they have a ton of extra money in their pocket to, keep themselves afloat medically and be able to, overcome COVID.
Right.
But that's just me. I just don't think the risks outweigh, or the pros outweigh the cons.
Yeah, and it's also the problem of if they're given the chance to opt out, I don't know if they have lose their scholarships, because
Right.
if somebody is losing their scholarship and they're not going to be able to pay the tuition to go to that school anymore, they're obviously going to risk the chance of getting sick and risk the chance of the medical bills just to get their tuition paid for, because they'd otherwise not be, and that puts them at more of a risk, and that makes more players willing to play. And it just creates this whole system where it's just bound to fail and bound to not work. I feel because I personally think a lot of schools are going to be sent home after a month or a month and a half or something like that.
Right.
And if schools are sent home, that means sports can't happen. So I think they shouldn't even bother starting until they see how bad the outbreaks are on campuses.
Yeah, I think that, like Jack said, a lot of players attend school on a scholarship, and I think it's going to be interesting to see, because if sports do get canceled in a month or whatever, or in 6 weeks or whatever, right? Would their scholarships go away? If we do cancel all college athletics, because a player loses their scholarship if they get injured, right? So if they aren't playing at all, right, there's no chance of playing that season. Do they lose, or are they just forced to drop out of school for that year, or defer a year? What's the scenario going to happen in that case? So
I think
yeah.
that's going to differ on a college to college basis, but ultimately I think the schools just have too much power over the kids.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
I think one thing that I'm interested to see play out in Missouri for the high schools, they said oh, you can't have any sports if you don't have any in-person classes, which is there. I think that's Misha trying to say if you want to play sports, you need to have classes. So they're trying to get people to be in person. I think that's guilting them into doing that. And if a similar thing plays out in college campuses, because that's a lot of money that sports teams can bring in for a college, so they might force people to stay on campus even though there have been so many outbreaks and so many people sick, just so they can make their money. And I mean, that would suck, but I mean, it's very possible that could play out.
Right. Well, I don't know if you saw, but actually yesterday that got repealed. So now, yeah, Misha is saying that schools that are virtual are still allowed to play sports, which I don't know if I necessarily agree with.
Yeah.
I don't think you should be putting kids in that
Reversible for
situation.
shouldn't
Yeah.
Well, here's like maybe certain like track or cross country you could do, but you would do like how you do it, you would just like individually set up a time to run, and then they
Yeah.
just time your
Like
run, and then
individual sports would be okay, but I don't think
Yeah, I
like
think
team
golf
contact
might be
sports.
the easiest to do.
yeah,
Maybe tennis, like singles tennis.
Mhm.
tennis maybe, golf.
I just don't think it makes sense if you're wanting to minimize the risk of transmission by not having kids go to school. It doesn't make sense for them to play sports too.
Right. If you don't think it's safe enough to have your students in a classroom with one another, why do you think it's going to be safe enough to have them like sweat and tackle one another?
Yeah.
Excellent point. Okay, so I think we saved the best for last in this case. This has almost ruined Jack and my friendship. This thing, I'm overhyping it a lot. This is a conversation that has been had for years. It is the age-old, is water wet? And Liam, we want to hear your thoughts on this first.
I'm gonna start with a simple yes for now.
A
Water.
simple yes for now. All right. Well, we know Jack has some different opinions. So, Jack, why don't you give us a little more complex no?
I believe that water is not wet. I think that the definition of wetness is that a liquid adheres to solid surface, meaning a solid. So liquid on a solid is what makes it wet. I think water itself is a liquid. Therefore, a liquid cannot make another liquid wet. That's just my belief of the definition. Water definitely makes other things wet, but it cannot make itself wet, because when you add water to water, that's just water. It's not water plus water. It's just water. When you add water to a table, that's water plus table. It's not, the same thing anymore. That's my opinion.
Okay, so it should come as no surprise, but I am mostly yes on this as well. I think that, and I don't know if Liam has a different opinion, so I'll let him give his explanation after. But I am of the mindset that water is defined as simply covering something in liquid or wet. When something is wet, it simply means covered in liquid, right? It doesn't specify whether or not that substance has to be a solid or a liquid or what. So when you look at an individual water molecule, right, two hydrogens and an oxygen, when that becomes surrounded by other hydrogen and oxygen water molecules, right, that water molecule has been surrounded by other waters, making that water wet. That is why I believe water is wet.
I agree wholeheartedly. The individual single water molecule, if it weren't surrounded by other water molecules, would not be wet. But because it's surrounded by a whole bunch of other water molecules, that's what makes it wet in my book.
Yes.
I think my issue with that is the fact that water molecules are so small, and to say that when one water molecule is combined with another water molecule, that makes that water molecule wet, is extremely microscopic and not important on this level. We're talking about the human surface level, which I think is why water cannot make itself wet. It can make other things wet, but it cannot make itself wet.
In a practical example, water's always going to be wet. Have you ever touched water and not been wet afterwards?
No, yeah, water makes my finger wet after I touch it, but
Because water is covered in so much other water.
No, it's because water is the liquid, and it's making
That's
my
covered.
finger
Yeah, it's
solid wet.
a liquid because you feel the liquid because of the way that the molecules are shaped and like or polarizing with each other.
Yeah.
Do you think that fire can be burned?
Can fire be burned? No.
Yeah.
But fire's not a physical substance. Fire's the product of a chemical reaction.
Right. That's my theory I think fire being burned is the same thing as water being wet.
But a fire isn't like a thing that you can touch.
No, but if you touch it, you become burned. If you touch water, you become wet.
But water's
Right.
already touching water. Fire doesn't touch anything.
I mean, the fire. If you put more fire on fire, it's just more fire.
But fire
It's a
isn't
fire.
like
It's a bigger
our
fire.
fire.
Fire isn't like a physical. My issue with that is that fire isn't like a physical thing.
It's the product of a reaction. It's not in and of itself a substance.
I think that water being a liquid and fire being a gas is exactly why I think that it can only make solids wet.
Fire isn't a
They're
gas,
different
though.
states of matter. Okay, yes, I know fire isn't a gas, but it's similar point is what I'm saying. I don't think air can be dry.
Ooh, wait a minute.
It just
Uh,
makes you feel. It just makes you feel dry. It just feels
Wow.
dry.
Okay, now we're going into what does dry mean?
Yeah. Dry
Okay,
means
Because I think
dry
we
means
could end this conversation because the moral of the story is I don't believe that water is wet. You guys do, and that's it.
okay. We're gonna leave it open ended. I like this.
I like that.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
Let us know your thoughts. Is water wet?
You should comment. What
oh
you
yeah.
think.
Comment down below. I
Down in
think
the comments down below.
we have like 3 comments in the past 7 episodes. So
Hit
let's try to
the
double
bell
that.
for notifications.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Subscribe. We want to shout out Daniel Zung.
Smash that like button.
Smash that like button. Make sure to follow us. Make sure to tell other people to follow us as well. Okay, yeah, this has been Jews with the News.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.